For the first time since inflation peaked at over 9% and the Federal Reserve raised rates, inflation is now starting to pick up steam again. Year over year, we are seeing an increase, and the precious metals markets appear to be stuck. We're going to talk about why and so much more as we explore. That's right, the numbers are out from the Consumer Price Index, and we're going to go over those here shortly. But first, we want to talk a little bit about what the precious metals markets are doing right now. Upon initial reaction, they appear to be kind of stuck or frozen where they are now. But if you enjoy videos like this where I do precious metal analysis and news with regards to the metals complex, hope you will consider subscribing to the channel and posting a comment down below, especially if you're a new subscriber. I want to know so that I can properly thank you. And also, if you press that thumbs up button, it would be greatly appreciated. So where are the precious metals markets now? Moments before they close, well, gold is actually down slightly, down only 60 cents today to $1,913.80, 1913, the same year as the Federal Reserve Act. Yes, indeed. Quite ironic, is it not? Silver is up 4 cents. So slight recovery with silver at $22.78. So there's where the gold and silver is now. So what's going on here with the Consumer Price Index? Reuters actually has a pretty good article here that talks about the numbers. We're going to go through some of these because I think it's important to understand some of the nuance here. But there's another statistic I'm going to share with you later that I think is going to blow you away when you think about inflation, because it is still hot and heavy. The Consumer Price Index report is one of two before the Federal Reserve's next meeting on September 19th through the 20th. Financial markets overwhelmingly expect the central bank to leave its policy rate unchanged at the meeting, but that calculus could change in the coming days and weeks and months. And according to the CME's Fed Watch tool, it's overwhelmingly now saying that they're going to kind of leave it where it's at and pause. But stocks on Wall Street were trading higher, and the dollar did edge down a little bit against the basket of other currencies. So where is this Consumer Price Index? It's up 2.2% year over year, which may not sound like much, but in a period where we've seen inflation go down a bit, in other words, it's disinflation. See, there's a difference between disinflation and deflation. Deflation is when things actually go below the actual rate. In other words, it would be negative, go into negative territory where the goods actually become cheaper. They're just becoming less expensive quicker, but they're still gaining in expense. And now they're picking up by 2% year over year. So July, those numbers are now out, and it matched the rise in June. Underlying inflation was curbed by a 0.3% drop in core goods prices, which followed a 0.1% dip in June. Goods deflation was driven by used cars and trucks, whose prices dropped 1.3%. So there, the prices were going down, but just in that one area. There was also decreases in the prices of new cars and household furnishings. But those aren't things you buy every day, that's for sure. Services inflation remained sticky, rising 0.3% for a third straight month. Services were lifted by higher rental costs. Owners' equivalent rent, and a measure of the amount homeowners would pay to rent or would earn from renting their property, rose 0.5 percentage point after climbing 0.4% in June. And we have also independent measures have been showing rental cost on a downward trend as apartment buildings come to the market. Rent measures in the CPI tend to lag the independent gauges in several months. Annual increases in rents slowed to 7.7% in July after topping 8.1% in March. Housing disinflation will pick up momentum in the coming months, according to Lydia Bossier, senior economist at EY Parthenon in New York. So when you have things like that, But there's some a little bit of nuance there. But also, you keep in mind, there's a narrative that wants to be pushed here. And some of this very well could be spin. There's also increases in the cost of motor vehicle insurance, education, and recreation. Airline fares, though, declined over 8%. And a lot of that could be there for a myriad of different things. But all of the things that we use and spend money every day are up. In the 12 months since July, the so-called core CPI increased 4.7%. That was the smallest year-on-year advance since October 2021, and following a 4.8% rise in June, the core PCE increased at 3.1 annualized rate over the past 3 months. And as good inflation eases, services, which are used more often, are stepping in and causing for this big increase. And that's really where it matters, folks. And so they're trying, Reuters obviously does, I think they have an agenda as well as most of the major media, so they're trying to make this thing look good. So where are the biggest rises in these costs are going to come for housing? Other goods and services are up dramatically, over 6.2% for housing. But that's not the big number that I want to tell you about, which should concern us all. Other goods and services up 6%. Food and beverages up over 4.7. Actually, that's 4.8% for food and beverages. Recreation is up 4.1%. And apparel is up as well, over 3.2%. So there you have it. An average, all items together are up 3.2%. It's only education that's come back a little bit, but that's still up 1.2%. Medicare has come down slightly. Medical care, rather, has come down only very slightly. And transportation, which means like used cars and things like that, and that was going to eventually come back around as supply chains came together anyway. So really, there's no surprise there at that kind of thing to see that occur and happen. But nonetheless, what's going on? What's the other thing that are in effect? When you take a look into perspective here as to where the markets are as the precious metals start to digest some of this stuff, we have to take into account a lot of different things we have to realize. Yeah, also the political front here too. Now, obviously, the White House is spinning this. I say that annual inflation is fallen by around 2/3 since last summer, and inflation outside of food and energy has fallen to its lowest level in any 3-month period since September 2021. And that may sound all good and dandy, but we have to keep things in perspective. That's according to what the president said. We've made this progress while maintaining the broad strength of the economy. Unemployment remains near record lows. A higher share of working age Americans are working now more than 20 years. Real wages for average American workers are growing and are higher than they were before the pandemic. Well, of course, but they're not keeping up with inflation. So that spin really does not really work too well. That's for sure. But anyways, it's kind of funny. All of these arguments can be refuted very easily. He says, we're growing the economy from the middle out and bottom up, lowering costs for hardworking families and making smart investments in America. That's Bidenomics, according to Joe Biden. But the thing is the reaction to that by Republicans and give a little different viewpoint here. The Inflation Reduction Act is really the Inflation Act, and we're seeing evidence of it right now. There's a lot of money that's being spent. In fact, we borrowed over $1 trillion in a span of 5 weeks recently. That's never been seen or done before. That should tell you something. That's one staggering statistic we're going to get to that's going to only support gold and silver in the medium to long term, and because they hold their value in spite of what they're doing to the dollar. It's absolutely insane. So what's going here? Since the president took office, prices are up 16.9%. That's almost 17%. That's what the inflation we're really seeing, folks, here. And wages are down about 3%. And so this is not good. And when we see here, monthly inflation was up 2.2% from month over month, and year over year it was up 0.2% as well. That excludes food and energy prices, and that was 4.7% in the year ending in July. So, folks, overall, no matter how it's spun, the economy is not in good shape. And these employment numbers, again, some of these numbers were revised downward that we've seen in previous months. And not only that, but you think about these employment numbers. How many people are working 2+ jobs, having to do that in order to pay for inflation, spending more time away from their families to have to earn an extra side hustle in order to make things work out. And that's kind of the economy we're dealing with right now. And as supply chains come back together and people desperate to get back to normal after the pandemic, we're still recovering from that. So I think this is part of the reason why that could just as easily turn around to the other side. And I'm not saying the economy is going to crash anytime soon. I think we're very resilient here. And there's some other factors in here that may very well be good, but it's not as good as is being spun. Folks, inflation is definitely heading in the other direction, and that's up. And so that's a concern, which is why I think it's probably a growing possibility that the Federal Reserve may decide to raise rates one more time. Now, the other reason why I think the precious metal markets are frozen is because they have to look at both sides of the fence here. If the Federal Reserve was to raise rates one more time, they really do risk, bringing on a recession a lot quicker. Hastening a recession now in the midst of presidential election season, that's quite risky. And the powers that be do not want to cause any kind of instability to bite the hand that feeds them, because essentially they all look out for each other there in Washington. And the powers that be, the establishment, well, who's in charge right now? They want to keep those same people in charge because they are all about the establishment. But nonetheless, for those of us who really understand what's going on in the economy and with the dollar and monetary policy, we understand that gold and silver provide the best value and the best way to protect ourselves against economic instability, whether it be inflation, deflation, or any number of other factors that could cause worry. And there's a lot of things to worry about these days. And I'm not saying you should spend your every waking moment thinking about this, but when you have activity happening in Alaska from China and Russia that is threatening measures, when you have things like explosions in Russia that are happening just recently, when you have things like threats to Taiwan, and there's a lot of geopolitical uncertainty that can really affect and move things in one direction or another. And then on top of that, when you have the BRICS nations that have at least the desire to try to declare independence from the dollar as much as possible, that's de-dollarization. And it may not manifest itself like many are saying here in this community, but still, it is a growing threat, and de-dollarization is definitely a real thing. So we have to keep all of this in perspective as we navigate these waters. So having gold and silver in your portfolio, I think, is a wise thing, and I know I'm glad that I have them. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. Hope you found this video informative, insightful, and educational, and I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to each and every one of you for watching, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.